one of the unique things about partnering with a school district is that they have many different constituents. And so you have the students themselves who are minors, who require special protection around data and data sharing. And when I think about the questions about sharing and linking data between education and the police department, I see both possibilities and I see both things that make me nervous about linking juvenile records with education and making sure that students can get full chances and second chances. And so it's not just how we think about the logistics of data sharing, but how we think about protecting, particularly minors in education. And school districts also serve families, and families are an interesting set. My work particularly focuses on family-school engagement and how families, particularly families with adolescents, partner with the school or not partner with the school, or work against the school or around the school, or families are developing their own partnerships with the school, and they are part of the ways in which researchers like to partner with the school district in thinking about families. And then there are the teachers, staff, administrators, and other ways in which and other people engaged in the school district around which research and partnerships can happen. And what's a wonderful thing about the School of Education and about schools is that we're a nation where education still matters, where an education is key to the future. It's a key to individual success. It's key to the way in which democracies function. And schools educate, but they really require all of us to partner with schools so that children have the best possible chance to succeed and to become all that they can be. And as myself as a developmental psychologist and a researcher that focuses on how to support adolescents and to support them in developing their goals, not just to succeed in school, but to find their sense of purpose and link that purpose to their contributions to society and how education prepares them, and they see value in education. They don't just have to go to school, but they see what they're doing in school as it fits with what they want to be and has that sense of utility. And so when you look at topics in partnerships with the Boston Public Schools and with education, it can include things like basic child and adolescent development. These kids are unfolding right in front of our eyes, right in the classroom. I always think, they're learning the topic when they're in middle school and high school, but they're also developing cognitively, socially, physically. So you have all these things happening. And there's curriculum development and research around assessment and teachers' own professional development. So there are all these topics and ways in which schools and education are rich places for partnerships with universities. But then there are also ways in which there are special challenges that school districts find, because that's where kids spend their days and more waking hours in the classroom than they spend any place else. Anyone who's interested, a researcher interested in kids, any topic, I could go get a sample from the schools. And so schools find themselves inundated with requests to do research that may or may not add value to their day-to-day work and the things they're being held accountable for. So when you think about partnerships with the school district, there are unique challenges where we really have to weave through all the different possibilities to do research to find what are true partnerships, where it's a win for the researchers and it's a win for the school districts, it's a win for the students, the families, the teachers. And there are a lot of research opportunities that are not necessarily partnerships. And so what I hope we're going to talk about today is not only an example of a successful partnership in Success Boston, but to have a broader discussion around how universities and the school departments can find these true partnerships, develop them, and sustain them. And so we're going to talk about Success Boston, which is a partnership among Boston Public Schools, the City of Boston, the Boston Private Industry Council, UMass Boston, and others. And it's a program that focuses on college access, college readiness, and provides coaches for teens to help them find their way from secondary school to college, which, as a developmental psychologist, that just fits what adolescents need. They're pulling away from their families, they're developing their own identities, and what they really need is someone else, another adult that cares about them, that sees their best interests and will guide them in a way that parents still want to, but the teens are backing away from their families. And so how, in adolescence, when they think they know everything, they need opportunities to try out things, make mistakes, and get coaching so that they can find their place, find their potential, and ultimately succeed. And so we are going, just like the last panel, have 3 speakers that are going to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves, fishbowl style, and then spend the last 15 minutes where we'll take questions from the field. And so their full bios are in the program, so I will just introduce them very briefly in the order in which they'll speak. First, we'll have John McDonough, who is the Interim Superintendent at Boston Public Schools. He's the former Chief Financial Officer, and he's received numerous awards in thinking nationally around financing and education. Next up will be Elizabeth Pauley, who is the Senior Program Officer with a focus on education from the Boston Foundation, and she began her career for Teach for America and has been involved in the Department of Education in Massachusetts and a part of the work that helped pass the groundbreaking Education Reform Act of 2010. Third, we have Josh Goodman, who is Assistant Professor of Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, and his research focuses on labor and public economics as it focuses on college access and college financing. And unique about him is not only is he a Harvard professor, but he has also been a public school teacher. So you talk about partnership right embodied. And then after he speaks, we will have John McDonough come back up and give us some kind of coordinated and ending comments, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you to the Rappaport Institute for providing this extraordinary and exciting opportunity to have a series of discussions about partnerships with universities and others and how we make our city better. I'm going to focus my time on Success Boston, but I did want to give you a sense of some of the relationships between BPS, Boston Public Schools, and being supported by research that has informed our policy and our practice. So just recently, Harvard University came out with a validation of the work that has been done in early childhood education and pre-K in Boston Public Schools, and shows the strength of that intervention in eliminating achievement gaps. And it has been the basis upon which we're very excited that Mayor Walsh has now set a goal for the city for universal pre-K. The Annenberg Institute and Center for Collaborative Education just recently released a report on Black and Latino boys in the Boston Public Schools. This shapes our work around our highest priority within the Boston Public Schools, which is elimination of opportunity and achievement gaps. The Gaston Institute was the institute that provided research on programs and performance for our English language learners, and has informed our approaches to improving that practice, where now our former English language limited English proficient students, they are now the highest performers in BPS of any group at all. And finally, we're looking forward to working with Nancy and the Boston Area Research Institute in terms of their evaluation of the work that has now been done in our first year of introduction of our new home-based student assignment program. We'll be focusing on issues of equity, access, prioritization for school choice. Success Boston. Getting ready, getting in, and getting through is probably the best example of successful partnership, which is a hard thing for all of us, that has impacted students in our schools. And I'm looking over you to get to my slides. This is was started by research that was done by the Center for Labor Market Studies at Northeastern, in conjunction with the Private Industry Council and supported by the Boston Foundation. It's called Getting to the Finish Line. Tough hitting results. 35% of BPS high school graduates who enrolled in college graduated in 7 years. It's not a good record. Not a good record at all. Mayor Menino saw those statistics and said, we're going to do something about this. And in Mayor Menino's style, he convened president of the Boston Foundation, the superintendent, and higher ed, and basically said, we're going to take this on. And for the class of 2011, we will increase that college graduation rate from 35% to 70%. The interim goal right now is 52% completion for the class of 2009. And if you do the math, 2009 plus 6 years, they're coming up. So the goal is 52%. Right now, we're at about 49% college completion rate. Wow. Wanted to talk a little bit about what I see as some of the key elements for the success of this partnership. Clearly, collaboration and alignment across sectors. This is a multi-sector collaboration. The hardest thing to do in this city. Get everybody in different sectors on the same page at the same time, unified in purpose, and thankfully, in this case, focused on lifetime success of the students that we serve. Key elements in that partnership has been letting data both inform our learning, but more importantly, inform our practice. A commitment of all sectors for both organizational and financial resources that are focused on this effort. Clearly established goals, growth in college matriculation, year-to-year persistence, and college completion. Those are the benchmarks. The Boston Foundation reports on them every single year, publicly. Strong governance structures to engage partners in strategic planning and implementation, and redefining success from high school graduation to college completion. Here's what's happened in BPS. We've increased our access to advanced placement courses. 29% of our juniors and seniors are enrolled, compared to 22% in 2008. Increase in FAFSA completion rates. That's grown from 57% to 63%. There's clear correlation between success and completion of this process. First-year college enrollment rate averaging 70%. We are now at the highest graduation rate within BPS since 1975, and decrease in the need for academic remediation upon college. It used to be that 44% of our college entrants required remediation. That's now down to 35%. There you go.
Wow, 20 seconds. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to join you. And in our planning call, I said, oh, no, Superintendent, you can go first. I'll just follow you. And that's a rookie mistake that I know better than to make. But thank you for that overview. I'm going to give you the punchline of my comments up front. And that is, it's through this partnership that we're actually really beginning to move the needle on a very thorny, complex, long-standing challenge that has faced the city, and in this instance, its college students for a long time. So let me back into why I think that. As John described, Success Boston is the city's college completion initiative, We launched in response to a report that Dr. Andrew Sum and his colleagues at the Center for Labor Market Studies did. They were the first people in Boston to ask the question and then connect it to data. What happens to these BPS graduates, after they leave? So it was the first longitudinal look, and I'd say we were ahead of most cities in asking that very question. And as John said, the data was fairly bleak, 35% of those who enroll. And if you look at the numbers, that's 2,000 kids went to college and 675 completed an associate's or a bachelor's degree by the time they turned 25. So clearly a call to action. And I think when we looked at the problem, we asked, and Mayor Menino asked, is it the responsibility of the schools? Is it K-12? Is it the responsibility of higher ed? Is it the responsibility of all these youth development nonprofits who are working with them? And the answer was, it's the responsibility of all of us. And I think one thing about Success Boston that is unique is that it lives in the space that belongs to no one sector exclusively, and that's where the potential of this partnership comes from. So our mantra is getting ready, getting in, and getting through. John described the work that's happening to help kids become more academically prepared. Critical component, and you probably know this from your own experience, is being academically ready to do the work. But it's more than that too. It's understanding what is a syllabus and understanding how to manage your time and understanding your own personal accountability. So readiness is a comprehensive thing that the BPS has said, we're going to tackle this and we're going to send more ready kids. The Boston Foundation invested in a set of nonprofit partners who provided coaching, as Nancy described, to these students to help bridge that move from high school to college. So even as kids are getting more ready, especially first generation low-income kids without networks of people who have done this before need help to tackle those problems that are inevitably going to come up. They might be, I didn't get into the class that I need for my major, or they might be, I need someplace to live, and everything in between. And so the coaches who are funded at 6 organizations really help largely, we call them transition coaches, but with non-academic challenges, life challenges, teaching kids how to build their college knowledge. So the coaches don't stay with the students formally until they graduate from college. They stay with them for the first 2 years of their college experience so that they can build their college knowledge, so that students are building the skills and behaviors that they'll be able to navigate through to a degree. And just quickly on that, what we've seen through that coaching work, and again, it builds on the readiness work that the BPS has done, and I'll get to the higher ed role in a second, but what we've seen over the life of Success Boston is that kids who have a coach are able to remain enrolled at significantly higher rates than kids who don't. And in some ways, that's almost like a duh statement. If you have someone who will help you solve your problem, you're going to be able to solve your problems more effectively than if you tried to go it alone. But what struck our research partners at Northeastern was the fact that kids were able to persist at 10 to 20 percentage points higher rates than their peers who looked like them, who went to the same high school, who go to the same college, who don't have a coach. And if you look around at the literature, this 10 to 20 percentage point impact on year-to-year persistence, which goes from first year to second and second to third, is really significant. And of course, that's also fairly obvious. If you don't remain enrolled, you will never actually complete. So we've seen these results hold for all students from the BPS. We've seen them for students who traditionally, whose outcomes traditionally lag behind their peers. So young men who struggle to complete college. Joe McLaughlin is in the audience, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's almost 2 to 1 women to men in terms of communities of color completing post-secondary credentials. So we've seen these results hold for young men of color, Black, Latino young men, Black and Latino women, and community college students who also struggle to complete at the same rate as their 4-year peers. So we're very buoyed by this coaching intervention and the progress that we're making. But again, it's a partnership, and so that relies on the handoff. After 2 years of coaching, 37 institutions of higher ed in the city have said, we'll take it from there. We'll commit to providing students with just-in-time supports and the help that they need as they navigate through to a degree. This year, we've just added a fourth component, which was always implicit in our work, which is getting connected. Because flowing through all of that is helping kids see the relevance and a reason for pursuing a post-secondary credential, and that's expanded career advising, internships, and on-campus work. That's been a close partnership between the institutions of higher ed and the business community. So we believe that the progress that we're seeing in the academic readiness of kids, in the coaching translating into persistence, and higher ed's own campus-based commitments, which are translating, that's what's translating into higher ed's, into increased completion rates. A lot of this work had been happening before 2008 when Success Boston launched. It's not a new idea that there are nonprofits who will work with students and mentor them. It's not a new idea, as you know, on higher ed campuses, that there are people who will help students solve problems. But the new idea is that we're doing that together, and as John said, we're being driven by the data that we see. We are accountable to each other, and it's sometimes messy. As you know, partnership is not always easy, but we actually believe that the partnership is what makes this giant problem seem a lot smaller. Thank you.
So I wanted to talk today about the fact, so I'm an academic. My job in life is to study these kinds of programs and ask the very, in some sense, basic question, how do we know that these programs are actually working? And I wanted to do it in the context of a very particular program that I've been involved with, which is a local organization called Bottom Line, which is an organization that provides intensive college advising for first-generation, low-income Boston BPS students as part of Success Boston. There are many other partners in Success Boston, obviously. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this question of how do we know, how does that organization know that the coaching it's providing is actually having an impact on the students? Because it turns out that's a very challenging question. It's challenging for a very simple reason. Bottom Line is an organization that works in a number of schools throughout Boston and other locations, and it asks students to apply if, in junior year of high school, if they want help with the college application process. So they have something called the College Access Program, where they will assign students a mentor who will work with them quite intensely. There's a very close relationship. They spend a lot of hours together through the whole college application process to get them to apply, to enroll, and then Bottom Line has a separate program called College Success, which then tries to keep them enrolled and completing, because enrollment and completion are clearly two very different things. The challenge in figuring out whether Bottom Line is successful is exactly this. The students who apply to Bottom Line are not a random subset of students in BPS. They are particularly motivated. They're from families who may care. The students themselves may be particularly motivated. So if in the end we're just comparing the students who get Bottom Line coaches, get this intensive college guidance to the students, even in the same high schools who don't, it's not clear that that's an apples to apples comparison. Mm-hmm. And to the organization's credit, it's aware that that's not an apples to apples comparison. And so my job as an academic researcher is to step in and say, let's try to do this as carefully as possible to try to isolate what we really think the impact of this particular program is, to understand, should we be investing our time and effort and money here or in some other aspect of Success Boston or other types of interventions we haven't even envisioned yet. And so I just wanted to tell you a few of the things that had to happen in order for such an evaluation to occur. And you'll get a sense of what sort of the interplay between sort of academic researchers and schools and local organizations, all the things that have to happen in order for one of these evaluations to happen. So Bottom Line, to its credit, so the first thing that had to happen is that Bottom Line, the organization, actually wanted to know whether it was working, whether it was successful. And you would be surprised, or maybe not surprised, it's actually very rare for organizations to want to do rigorous evaluations of their own interventions, because in some sense, it's a very risky thing, right? There are roughly two possibilities, good news or bad news, and roughly. Good news may help the organization, but the fact is the organization already thinks that it's good news, right? And it tells its funders it's good news. And so in some sense, there's only downside risk in some ways for the organization. So I was really impressed that Bottom Line came to me and another researcher at the University of Virginia and said, no, we really want to do this right. We take this stuff seriously. If our program's not working, we want to change it or rethink what's going on. So thing one that has to happen is that the entity involved or whoever is doing the intervention has to be interested in a real rigorous evaluation. Thing two is you have to actually be able to get the data. And so bottom line, again, to its credit, kept very careful records of its whole application process. It had everyone who ever applied to it. It kept Excel spreadsheets of all the information they submitted. And the wonderful thing from my perspective as a researcher is that I was willing to connect with Carrie Conaway, who's in the audience here, who's the head of research for the State Department of Education. And I've worked with her on a number of projects. And what that means is that she and I know we have a very sort of fast process. I come to her and I say, look, Carrie, I've got something that is valuable to the state of Massachusetts to know. I think I've got a way of getting at the question. Would you be willing to provide data to help me answer this question? And if I can convince her that I've got a good question and a good strategy, it's very easy to get data from her. And we have a nice set of agreements in place to keep all the data secure, et cetera. So the point is I've got an existing relationship with a data provider that makes it very low cost to start a project like this. Often just getting the data together is a hard thing to do. Another thing you need is a funder, because someone has to pay for either my time or a research assistant time just to pull this data together. And so I was very lucky that down the hall from my office sits the Rappaport Institute, who are willing to give some funds to help this project happen. Another thing you need is an empirical strategy. How do you actually figure out, how do you do an apples-to-apples comparison here? It turns out that in this case, we were able to come up with a little bit of what I think is a clever idea, which is that bottom line, when it gets its applications, actually screens students on the basis of their high school GPAs, because it wants to make sure that it's giving counselors to people it thinks have a high chance of succeeding in college. And they take sort of a decent high school GPA as evidence of that. And so what we were able to do is do a comparison of students who were just above the GPA that they were looking for, that threshold, and the ones just below. So these are students who are nearly identical in every way, but bottom line was willing to serve one set of them and the other just because of resource constraints. They said, we're sorry, you're going to need to find help elsewhere. And so that's how we dealt with the apples-to-apples comparison. The short version of the story is we've done the evaluation. It worked decently well. We wish we had a little bigger sample size. We found some of what I would call strongly suggestive evidence that bottom line really does work to increase college enrollment. And in particular, it does one thing particularly well, which is it actually convinces students to go to a subset of colleges in Massachusetts where it thinks they will have a high chance of success. So not all colleges are equal. If you look at college graduation rates, they vary quite widely. And so we'd like to be encouraging our students to enroll in colleges that look like they have a track record of actually graduating students and giving them relatively low debt level on graduation. And bottom line, there's suggestive evidence, I think, that it seems to be succeeding at this. The last thing I'll say is the results from our study weren't perfect. The design wasn't perfect. The sample size wasn't perfect. Our estimates are a little bit noisy. To bottom line's credit, it said, OK, we want to do this even better going forward. They are now actually running a randomized controlled trial where they are going to know for sure. They're going to take its applicants, do a little bit of coin flipping to determine who gets in, because all these students are worthy in some sense, and so we might as well learn something on the way. And to their credit, they are doing the randomized evaluation going forward, which will really definitively answer some of these questions. And so I'll end on the note, which is, as a researcher, the thing that I would love to see is organizations willing to entertain these questions, willing to really do rigorous evaluations. And in particular, if they're willing to go to the mat and do these randomized evaluations, that's usually the most rigorous and exciting evidence we can provide. And so I'll stop there. 12 seconds over.
Nicely done.
John, would you like to have some summary kinds of synergizing comments?
Energizing comments from me. Great. I'm reminded that my predecessor, Dr. Johnson, always referred to this work as the most important work the nation has to do. Mm-hmm. Because really, what we're talking about crosses all sectors, and we all have a role to play. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure that the students that we serve become strong scholars, strong leaders of family, heavily engaged in their community, and ultimately the foundation of our democracy. That is our collective work. Without being able to effectively partner with all people who need to support each child on their terms, not our terms, on their terms, Without having that ability, we set ourselves up for failure. So partnerships are hard. I know the data requests that we get and the amount of turnaround time we take to get it. Without places like the Boston Foundation, without the universities that this city is very fortunate to have as an asset unlike any other city in the nation. We can get it right in Boston. We are able to do that. But it takes all of us stepping up to the plate. And it takes all of us being ready and knowing, as Elizabeth said, it gets messy along the way. Keep your eyes on the prize. Focus on the end game. And our kids will be better for it.
Thank you.
One thing I was very happy to hear in both of your comments was that if the end game is thinking about college completion, getting kids to enroll and helping them persist is certainly part of that. But you also talked about the fact that there's now efforts to make sure that earlier the sort of academic preparation track that students are on is the right one to get them to college. And I think about this a lot in the context of math education. That's one of the things that I research. And one of the things that's really remarkable is to think about what it takes to get a student to the place where in senior year of high school they can be doing something like advanced placement calculus, which we think of as what a student should be doing if they're going to be college ready in terms of math. If you think about the series of events that has to happen in order for them to get there, it goes roughly like in 8th grade they better take Algebra 1. Because in 9th grade, they better take geometry, then in 10th grade, they better take algebra 2, then in 11th grade, they better take pre-calculus, and then they can take calculus. So if you think about where you actually have to start to get kids to the point of what we would call a college-ready high school transcript, it starts pretty early, and it's potentially hard to do.
Yeah, and I think it's especially hard for parents to navigate that when they themselves have not had a college experience. So for first-time college graduates, knowing in 8th grade that you need what you take in math and science and literature predicts or even dictates where you can end up in the end is something that's shocking for many parents who don't have a college degree. I want to ask each of you to talk about, since this is a conference about building partnerships and we're hoping that partnerships will find themselves in this room, I would like to ask John and Elizabeth, the two of you, how you found your university partner, and Josh, how did Bottom Line find you? And so how were these partnerships made? What were you each looking for, or what were the things that were deal breakers? I had to have that in place in order for it to make sense for me. And these were how did you do it? How did you find the partnerships?
Well, the first question is fairly straightforward. The Private Industry Council came to us and said, we want to work with Northeastern Center for Labor Market Studies. Okay. Andrew Sum is a labor economist who thinks a lot about youth employment and youth outcomes. So it started for us with a funding ask. Would we do that? But I think when we got on this path and realized, because institutionally we're so interested in data driving the work, we're very interested in data transparency, we realized we had lucked into some terrific higher ed partners. Mayor Menino asked Chancellor Keith Motley from UMass Boston to chair the higher ed piece of this work, and could not, I would argue, have found a better champion for this work and for the students. It's deeply personal to him, and for those of you who know him, he has been a leader, a thought leader, and a leading practitioner in this work for a long time. The interesting thing is, as we looked then to fill out the partnership, so we had Northeastern doing the research, we had Chancellor Motley calling everybody together. What was amazing was the number of places that raised their hands, both from the higher ed community and the nonprofit community. And so what we found was there were a lot of places in the nonprofit youth development space and in the higher ed space where people had been doing this work in isolation and were eager to learn from each other and to accelerate their efforts together.
I'm glad that you mentioned Chancellor Motley. I saw that he'll be on the program later today. If you're around, you'll know that Chancellor Motley is in the house. He has been extraordinary. He owns every kid. He personally owns them. Mm-hmm. And every kid knows that. Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to focus on a little bit of a different point here. I think that the effect of political leadership in bridging the gaps is extraordinarily important. We admire our political leaders for the vision that they provide for us and for the dedication that they have in this city under both Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh on the quality of life that we all aspire to and want to provide. Mayor Menino had a unique style, and you can imagine what that first meeting was like. He was able to mobilize people quickly. And I would say that in anything that is important in terms of the core work of the city, the place for political leadership in convening, in bringing people together, and recognizing that there is different strengths in different areas, that if somehow we can find our way to be synergistic with each other, great things happen.
Great.
So my answer is simple. Like all successes in my life, this one's totally due to my wife.
So if you want a partnership, marry well.
Yeah, exactly. No, so with Bottom Line, I'll give you three really quick examples. With Bottom Line, it was very interesting. My wife had clerked for a federal judge here in Boston, Patty Saris, who served on the board of Bottom Line, and she knew that the head of that organization was looking for someone to do an evaluation, and she knew me well, because, so that's how we connected. Bottom Line sort of found me through her. It happens in other ways for those of us in academia. I'm doing work with the Rappaport Institute evaluating recent school turnaround efforts in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And in that case, Lawrence just came right to Rappaport and said, look, we know we want research done. Help us figure out who at Harvard can, or who anywhere can do this work. I have another project that I have no idea if it'll ever succeed, but sort of thinking about studying the summer employment programs that are run here in Boston and thinking about their impacts on youth's long-run outcomes. And that's one where I read a Globe article and said, oh, this seems interesting, and I started getting in touch with folks. So I think these partnerships can happen in sort of all kinds of ways. The organizations involved can come to the academics and the researchers, or the researchers can come there. And it's always, at first, sort of, it's a little bit like dating, right? You get into a room, you get in a phone call, you sort of feel each other out and figure out, is this marriage going to work or not? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it's very important that everyone figure out fairly early on whether you're really on the same page about what questions are going to be answered, how they're going to be answered, what the final product is going to be.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I think, you asked about how we started the partnership. The real work since we started in 2008 has been maintaining the partnership.
That was my next question, so perfect.
So the political leadership has been the answer. We've had political leadership driving this work. We've had personal commitments from the leaders of the work. It's important work. But underneath that, once we all agreed to the goal and we were all told by our bosses to do it, we have to be very clear about the commitments we make to each other, the trust we build with each other. And I would say for us, the biggest sticking point has been the data transparency. Who gets to see it? When do they get to see it? What happens to it? And how are we making sure that the partners drive change while doing no harm to each other? And I'm not sure that we've fully figured that out. We're committed to working on it, but my advice to anyone starting a partnership is to really spend a lot of time up front on that, because when you don't, the first hurdle is a really painful one.
Can you elaborate on that some? Because I know in some of my own collaborations, there's been a lot of debate about who owns the data and and I'm an academic, and what happens when the findings are less than good news, as you described, Josh. And then there's some kind of sense, well, do we publish the data? Well, we don't want any aha moments. And, these are really sticky points that I think, Elizabeth, that you're talking about that need to be worked out in advance, because you don't want to work that out when you have the actual problem in front of you. So can you each of you talk a little bit about what that process looks like, lessons learned, advice to people in the room about how do you navigate those really sticky hurdles around data sharing and controversial findings and things like that?
Want me to start? Sure. So I intentionally up front gave you a list of those projects that we've been involved in. And I think most of you know that I was not the natural candidate for this position, so I sort of take maybe different approaches. However, you can see that all of those that are at least most recent, at some level, we asked for the report. Mm-hmm. And at some level, we are clear that at all times, there is likely to be not so good news emerging from the report. Mm-hmm. You've read about them all. But that's important for us as an organization, and I think it is an indicator of health of the organization when you can go out there and basically say, tell us what it is. Make it hard-hitting. Don't hold back. And then hold us accountable for responding appropriately. Mm. And then being in a position, as with Success Boston, to continue to monitor that over time. That can only happen successfully if there is a community open to continuous learning with expected continuous improvement. If everybody expects the release of a report results in crisis that is responded to with immediacy, that is not long-lasting, nobody has accomplished anything. So from my perspective, it's get it out there, share it, figure out what the strategy is to respond, and then be very intentional in our approach. And I think that those are reflective of some of the conversations we've had with Elizabeth from Boston Foundation. I think in terms of the who owns the data question, that is always sticky. And part of it gets to, so who's being impacted by the data? Whose data is it? Who is represented by the data? And I think all of us have worked through, at some level, agreements that allow for positive results at the end, but ensuring that there is security to individuals and particularly to students. Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing I would add, because I'm not sure, well, no, I'm sure we didn't take the time up front to work out the, universe of data sharing that was going to happen in the life of Success Boston. We have subsequently backed into that, but I think what I've learned from that is the number one mantra has to be no surprises for the partners, right? So I know in Chicago, with the Chicago Consortium for School Research, which had done this kind of longitudinal analysis before Boston did, I think they might have been the only city that did, that beat us to it, but they share the data with all of the institutions of higher education who are affected, whose data it is, whose graduation rates are being reported, for some period of time before it becomes public. Everybody gets to check the data, everybody gets to come up with their own interpretation and what this means, and also, importantly, they get to come up with what they're going to say to the newspaper when the paper calls and says, why do you trail your peers? And I think that we are working on that in Success Boston on what our protocols are going to be. I think being an initiative that has moved from its startup phase to sort of its second phase of life, we have the opportunity to really think about how do we institutionalize this partnership and strengthen. One of the partners in this work is Neil Sullivan from the Private Industry Council, and he talks about the hello, Neil. The importance of setting an authentically low baseline. So after no surprises, I would say we started with an authentically low baseline, which will allow us to show progress. So the second thing is, if at all, intellectually, in an intellectually honest way, you can show progress, that's really important for feeding and sustaining that partnership. And the last thing I'll say is that we do try to be cognizant of the fact that it's deeply personal. It's really important work, and for the people who do it, it is deeply personal. So when they look at that graduation rate, they see their own work, and they see their own success and their own failures. And while the work should be about the kids, and it is about the kids, it does have an impact, as you all know well, on the people who are doing the work, and so relationships really matter.
I feel like I've been learning a lot about marriage from my own analogies and the set a low baseline of expectations. So I love the no surprise. I think no surprise is exactly right. I'll say just one last thing, which is one thing that all the partners involved need to keep in mind is that incentives are different for the different partners involved. So it may be that the organizations and the funders have one particular set of things they want to come out of it, but I as an academic may have different professional incentives. So the thing, for example, that will or will not get me tenure at the Kennedy School is publication of sort of an academic version of this kind of research that's not really the product that the organization itself wants to read. And so I think it's always a little bit tricky to figure out how do you produce multiple products that talk to the different players in the different spheres that each of us is talking to. And again, I'll just point to Carrie Conaway in the audience again. I think one thing that's great that she's done in the State Department of Education is when I produce a full-blown research, an academic research paper out of data that I've gotten from her, she also asks, once the project is basically fully baked, that we produce sort of a 2-page policy brief, something very brief. It's just, easy for anyone to read who doesn't have the technical skill or the time to wade through the 30 to 40 pages of stuff that I write. So it's good stuff, but it's long. And so I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind, is that the academics may be talking to a slightly different set of people out of one side of their mouth than the partners, the partner organizations may have in mind. So that's all I'll say.
I could ask 1,000 more questions, but I want to open it up to the floor. Are there any questions? Again, if you could state your name as you before you give your question.
Robert Shue. The question of finance didn't come up. I'm wondering about what percentage of students drop out of college with a coach versus without a coach because of finances, as a reason given. Mm-hmm. Maybe a spurious reason, but as a reason. And presumably a coach would not only help with academic support, but sources of funding and encouragement like that.
Yeah, nationally we know that affordability and paying for college is, if not the #1 reason, it is certainly in the top 5 reasons why students leave college. And there's, I know, a long conversation we could have about college financing and what it costs families, how higher ed institutions are funding their own operations. It's a conundrum, to be sure. We don't know how many students in Success Boston leave because of finances as the stated reason. Typically, what we hear from our coaching staff and our partner organizations is that it's about their life as much as it is about their money. So they maybe need to get a new job because they need more money, they need to increase their work, they're having a baby, there are a lot of reasons, but we haven't pulled it apart to identify financing. I will say the BPS has been selected by the US Department of Ed or has joined. Either way, it's very important work they're doing to increase the FAFSA completion rate to ensure that kids who are eligible to receive financial aid receive the financial aid they're eligible for. And the last thing I'll say is that a core partner to Success Boston and to the Boston Public Schools in that work has been You Aspire, which makes sure that students who are eligible to do so complete their federal financial aid form, they renew them every year, and they understand, what debt they're signing up for and ways to minimize that debt.
I would just add that there is huge power in knowledge. So the fact that students become aware of what the basic requirements are is very powerful. And I'll share a very brief story. I was at one of these anxiety-rising state visits to English High. So I was sitting with the commissioner, and it was a number of students. And they were all seniors. Each one of those kids had identified their thinking in these conversations about what are the strategies that they need that governs, number one, their college choice and timing of college choice, and number two, on how to access the funds that were required for that option. It's incredible. It is it has become part of what they think about every day. It is part of their life planning now.
I think we have time for one more question from Twitter. If you're people who are following along, it's #CityData.
Yes, we've gotten a couple questions over social media. There were two I wanted to raise. The first was with Success Boston, is there any analysis done of the exam schools versus non-exam schools and the impact of the program? And then the second one, I think, was for the superintendent. What are the next areas of inquiry that you're looking to build partnerships around?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Yeah.
So the Center for Labor Market Studies has published annual analyses of the work, the different dimensions of it. So when we have new completion rate data, which comes from the National Student Clearinghouse, we publish that. We're able to track our own coach-student data through the extensive, frankly, reporting on the part of our coaches. Our higher ed partners are very collaborative, so we publish a lot of regular data, and we analyze it a lot of different ways. We have looked at the exam school, non-exam school performance rates, and I don't actually have those numbers in my head, but what I will tell you is that when I told you that of the 19 or 2,000 students who enrolled in college from the high school class of 2000 and the 675 who completed a degree, the vast majority of that 675 were exam school students. It continues to be the case that exam school students, who arguably are the most academically prepared, one could argue, in the Boston Public Schools, they continue to have higher college going and persistence and completion rates. However, it's important to remember that exam school is a proxy for a lot of other things. So exam school students, at least in the analysis we've seen, are far more likely to have access to scholarships, to work less once they're on campus, and to have other networks. And so it is about academics, but it is also about the non-academic readiness that comes with some of the exam school students and some of the exam schools.
So I think your question is, what's next, right? There has been a lot of attention that has been driven by the recent report on Black and Latino boys and all of those activities that are related to eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps. I think that part of that effort, which is not short-term, has to get down to the next level about what are the interventions that are required to leverage significant change. And then to go to the evaluation piece, how effective are those interventions? So I think that we sometimes have a tendency to be broad and thin. This is an opportunity to go deep. If you look at the demographics of Boston Public Schools, 78% of our students are students of color. And if you look at the subpopulation of turnaround schools in Boston, 90% of our students in those schools are students of color. Ultimately, our success is dependent on their success. BPS will not be successful unless we figure out how to do this effectively and how to do it in a way that is both scalable across the district and sustainable over time.
And so Boston Public Schools can be the leader of the nation, because I think the issues that you lay out are issues that every urban school district is dealing with in the nation. So let Boston be leaders in this. And join me in thanking the panel.